countries in Europe because it's super varied. So it's got tons of really interesting history. And even though its people have a reputation for being quite grumpy, you've met Joe, you know that that is not true. The Germans are really friendly and they're actually really funny. However, the Germans are super sarcastic and super dry. So if you think they're getting at you, they're 9 times out of 10 they are just joking. Like when Joe says he's going to push an eject button for my seat, 9 times out of 10 he is joking. It just depends on that 10th time what I've done. Sometimes he's serious. Now, Germany is huge. It's the largest economy in Europe. It's got 81 million people. And we are just going to be scratching the surface of it, but hopefully it piques your interest and you decide to come back one day. So, the capital is Berlin. We're going to be in Munich, which is pretty much the unofficial capital of Bavaria. And then we're going to the Rhine Valley as well, which is a totally different area. So you do get to see a little bit of the country. Now, Germans speak German, you know that. Most of the young ones do speak English, and just keep in mind that if a German is talking to you, no matter how angry they sound, that is just what German sounds like. They are most likely not shouting at you. They are just speaking their language. Now, it's a federal parliamentary democracy, so it's got a president and a chancellor. Angela Merkel, I'm sure you've heard of her. She's pretty much the de facto head of the EU. She is super powerful. She is kind of a badass. It's been a member of the EU since 1952, and it is one of the most peace-seeking and internationally involved countries in the world. It's got really varied geography because it's so big, and it includes the Alps, the shores of the Danube, and the Baltic and the North Seas. You've got forested uplands, and you've got rivers like the Rhine and the Danube, which actually flows through 6 different countries. There are lots of different ethnic groups here, and each one has brought something quite unique from their homeland, but it's also led to quite a turbulent and complicated past. Now, in terms of Germany's history, we could go back really, really far, but we don't need to. But I will just mention that this is where the very first Neanderthal skull was discovered. So in Neander Valley, 40,000 years ago, this is where we found it. You had modern humans near Ulm at the same time, so there have been people in Germany for a long time. It's been called some variation of Germany since Caesar's time. He named it Germania to differentiate it from Gaul, which is modern France. Now, the Germanic tribes we have spoken about a little bit in other countries. They began appearing around the Nordic Bronze Age, so they spread south, east, and west from Scandinavia and northern Germany. Now, they came into contact with Celtic Gauls and Central European tribes in the 1st century BC, and this was just the start of their interaction with foreigners. However, unlike in a lot of other countries, the Romans didn't have much of a foothold here. They started invading in the 1st century, but this only lasted until 9 AD. This is when the chieftain Arminius, he defeated the Romans at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, and he completely stopped the Roman conquest of Germania. He actually turned it entirely on its head, because 100 years later, it was the Germanic tribes who were now encroaching on Roman territory instead, because they began to settle along the Danube River, and this was a Roman frontier. Now, they got bolder and stronger, and in the 3rd century, we see the rise of some of the biggest tribes. So the Franks, the Saxons, and the Suebi were the most famous. Then they broke into Roman territory, and they were joined by the Vandals, the Visigoths, Lombards, Burgundians. These are all names that you kind of still see scattered throughout Europe. Now, the Huns, led by Attila the Hun, they invaded the unoccupied part of Germany in the 5th century, and they ruled it for decades before they were defeated. Now, for the next few hundred years, it was chaos. Tribes switching back and forth, fighting for supremacy, until finally, in 771, Charlemagne takes the stage. He ruled the Frankish lands. He was made the Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope in 800 in Aachen, and the power of his kingdom was cemented. Now, after his reign, the country was divided again, but in the mid-900s, we first come across the term the Kingdom of Germany. So they did kind of view themselves as a German people. Maybe not everyone on the fringes, but there was a sense of unity quite early on. Now, once it joined the Holy Roman Empire, we see the crowning of Otto the Great, and he was pretty influential. He introduced stricter religious rules, and he gave really extensive power to the clergy as well. And he placed the power of the country in the hands of the church. Then he defeated the Hungarian, Magyars, and the Slavs, and then he led a march on Rome. And this actually resulted in the removal of the Pope, and this was a massive coup, because for decades afterwards, there was imperial control over the Pope. The Pope was the most powerful person in Europe before this, and then the Holy Roman Emperor was like the secular Pope, kind of. And he came in, and he took the power away from the Pope, so this was a defining moment for Germany. Now in 1098, the Age of Crusades began. We've spoken about this. Many orders were formed, with the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights being the most famous. Now they wanted to reclaim the Holy Land, and this fight went on until about 1291. Now they were defeated, but this started off a tradition of Germans building over along the Baltic Sea. Now this is important because it was the beginning of them encroaching onto Slavic lands and treating the Slavs as people who needed to be pushed out of the way, even if they were in their own territory. And this would prove to be pretty much one of the main causes for World War II. Now at the same time, trade was flourishing between the Baltic regions and the rest of Germany, and major trading towns were being created. Plus, the Habsburgs, a German family, had cemented their power as Holy Roman Emperors, and they were now the most powerful family in Europe. And then, in 1439, we have one of the defining inventions of the Middle Ages, the printing press. It was invented by Gutenberg, and it completely changed how information was spread. So it played a huge part in bringing religion to the common people in the Protestant Reformation 100 years later.